Hey yo, what's good though? Soul here, and welcome back to the story mode. So I kind of had a thought recently. I know, shocker, but hear me out. Before the release of Legends ZA, I was actually doing a personal playthrough of Pokemon X and Y. I hadn't played the game in well over a decade almost, and I really wanted to see how well it held up all those years later. Needless to say, I never got around to actually doing that video, although I do have all of the footage, and if anybody is still interested in that specific video, I'm more than down to do it. However, before I got the chance to, we inevitably got our hands on Pokemon Legends ZA. As we're all fully aware, Pokemon Legends ZA serves as a pretty much direct sequel to Pokemon X and Y. We all knew precisely what this game was going to be once we got our first glimpse of it back in February of 2025. Because we by that point pretty much knew that it was going to serve as a sequel, I kind of wanted to revisit Pokemon X and Y, play through the game again, and see what kind of expectations I could have in terms of what I would want to see going into Pokemon Legends ZA. At this point in time, we are now decently far and away from both of those games and are looking towards the future with Pokemon Winds and Waves. However, looking back on it, I still really wanted to take a look at this idea that I had, this conversation that I wanted to have, and see how well it generally holds up. Now, what I'm precisely trying to ask here is if Pokemon Legends ZA serves as a good sequel. When you compare it to what was introduced to Pokemon X and Y, does it hold up well? Does it improve on a lot of aspects? Does it make the world of X and Y more interesting as a sequel? Look at you getting all cozy. Well, why don't you go ahead and take this nice cold water and this ramen with tartar sauce broth. Yes, absolutely delicious. While we go ahead and talk about the possibility of Legends ZA being a good sequel to Pokemon X and Y. Here in front of me is a semi-organized list, as per usual, of different categories that I consider personally good ways to evaluate whether or not Pokemon Legends ZA serves as a decent sequel. Clearly, as you can see by the time frame within this video, it is not a very long list. This is just a little bit of surface level criteria that I'm using as something of a base. Simply put, I picked the most major aspects that I felt were relevant to this conversation. With that in mind, let's kick things off with the first relevant topic, the region, Kalos. A region based off of France that everybody came to know and love very well during their tenure in X and Y. Despite how people may have felt about the overall game, especially later on down the line, people will definitely agree that there were still a lot of notable landmarks and a lot of really good music, and just generally a nice place to be in and explore. To the homey feeling rocky grassy plains of Geosenge, to the giant astronomically large crystal overseeing the entirety of Anastar City, to the shining dreamy long paths of the glittering caves, there was a lot to behold. It really was a vibe, and it felt really good to revisit Kalos after such a long time. So now we swap over to Legends ZA. Did it do a good job taking care of those vibes? Did swapping over to this region 6 years later do anything beneficial to it? Unfortunately, this is definitely where the game falls short. The primary reason being, we're not exploring Kalos, we're exploring specifically Lumio City. Like I've said a million times now, no need to get it twisted, I like Lumio City. It's very interesting, and I do love that it is the biggest city in the entirety of the Pokemon franchise. Right next to Castelia, I think. In the original games, it was kind of a trip to explore Lumio City like that because of the way they had it set up. Because you gotta remember, every mainline generational title up to that point had been top down from start to finish. Of course, I'm not gonna sit here and not acknowledge Castelia City for having that one little hallway that shifted perspective, but for the most part, it still followed that same rule everywhere you went. Not only were we playing our first 3D mainline generational Pokemon title ever, but we had an entire area, an entire city dedicated to having a camera perspective that was from behind us. Obviously, I can't speak for everybody, but the first time I remember seeing that, I was blown away. Which is funny, thinking back on something like that, because I definitely shouldn't have been. I've played other RPGs, I've played other games that have had behind the camera perspectives plenty of times before that. But I think what made that experience so grand back in the day was simply the fact that it was Pokemon. A perspective shift like that was kind of a novelty, something that we didn't get to experience very often within the franchise. So for them to just have fun, go out of their way, and design this city with the full intent of having a camera follow you from behind made it feel kind of special, and that's why Lumio City stuck so heavily with all of us. Legends EA very clearly doesn't understand what makes the novelty novel when it comes to Lumio City. Or at the very least, it kind of tries to, but it doesn't necessarily hit the mark. Because here's the thing, right? We're kind of looking at an ironic situation in which current Lumio City feels a lot more claustrophobic than the original Lumio City. And I do completely understand that the story is a part of the reason as to why it feels that way. But from a gameplay standpoint, it should still be fun to explore the one place that you're going to be stuck in the entirety of the game. And when it comes to the original visit to Lumio City versus what we have currently, they did not take that leap and tap into that potential. As we've talked about multiple times now, one of the biggest problems that people have with Lumio City is simply the fact that we thought it was going to be bigger. We thought we were going to be able to explore inside of more buildings, have a much more in-depth underground system. After so much time had passed, we would think we would have a lot more interesting landmarks to explore and visit within the city. We were waiting for those catastrophic events that could tear down certain areas within the city and make it a lot more interesting to explore, like it's a completely new area. Now here's the thing, maybe, just maybe, mine and a couple of others' expectations were just a little bit too high when it came to the potential of Lumio City. However, when I think back to what we had with X and Y my first time playing through, it just doesn't feel like it had that same wow factor. Now, of course, we also have to take into consideration that I am well and grown now, so I think it's probably a lot harder to hit me with that wow factor. And not to say that the game is completely devoid of any wow factor, but even when I did get hit with it, it kind of weaned off really fast. And another thing that I haven't mentioned nearly as often is simply the fact that they did not take advantage of the fact that one of the most important sports in Kalos is completely unacknowledged here. One of the most unique things about Kalos was simply the fact that roller skating and rollerblading was one of its biggest sports, so much so that they had ramps and parks and just designs completely dedicated around the region so that people could comfortably utilize skates everywhere. One of the things that surprised me the most about Legends EA is that roller skating is not present at all. Even Karina, who was well known not only for specifically being a Mega Evolution master, but also running a gym that was completely dedicated to rollerblading, completely abandoned that aesthetic. Call me crazy, but I think it's really strange and upsetting that they ripped that entire concept away from Lumio City, from Kalos, like that all of a sudden. What happened in those 6 years? Were the accidents too crazy? What made it so that this sport was completely ethered away from Kalos? Because again, looking back at X and Y, skating around the city was such a grand time that I figured that they would capitalize on that and evolve that idea. Instead of construction residue that made it convenient to get on top of buildings, why didn't we have it so we had like ramps and stuff like that that made it easier to get from building to building? Made it so that we could traverse a little bit faster as opposed to walking on foot everywhere. It's already crazy enough that in the second Legends game, we have less traversal options than we did in the first. But on top of that, we have less traversal options than we did in the prequel with X and Y. That's absurd to me. Suffice to say, when it comes to the region in particular, no, they did not improve on that aspect. And that really sucks, because I do truly feel that if they had just a bit more time dedicated to crafting Lumios with actual indoors to explore, a real underground system, an actual traversal system, we could have seen something absolutely incredible in that regard. But I guess it is what it is. Moving along here, the next category that I have listed is characters. Now, looking back on Pokemon X and Y, this was the first time that we were introduced to a larger cast of quote-unquote rivals, if you want to call them that. Of course, we had our primary rivals being Callum and Serena, then we had Tierno, Trevor, and Shauna. And it's really interesting because looking back, while it was the biggest rival group situation that we had in a mainline generational title up to that point, people would definitely argue that this is where the downfall of rivals probably started. Like, yeah, it was nice to have a much more realistic friend group, but at the same time, it's not like narratively they pushed anything all that heavy. I'll probably talk more in depth about this when I do like my full revisited video for Pokemon X and Y, but in all honesty, I don't think that these are very interesting characters at all. Of course, Shauna did have a little bit of potential with her storyline, but other than that, I was not really interested in any of these characters. They were just kind of around. Hell, let's be for real with ourselves. I had to Google their names just a minute ago for that voiceover. Yeah, as far as a main cast goes, these characters didn't really add all that much in terms of story or in character development. That's just my take though. We do need to remember though that these aren't the only characters that we were introduced to. Of course, we got our regional professor in Sycamore, who was actually a lot more present than a lot of previous professors up to that point. Hell, we didn't even make it to his actual lab until we got to Lumio City, funny enough. But he was a fun character to have around. I didn't really mind him too much. X and Y was also the first time we met the ever so mysterious AZ. You would come across him on your journey every now and again, babbling about something that you didn't completely understand until way later. Eventually, you would learn his entire life story once he was a captive in Team Flare's base. Everything in regards to the war, the weapon, Floette, and AZ's complete involvement. He was just as antsy, if not more antsy, to put a stop to Team Flare's antics than you were. And it wasn't until well after the events with Team Flare and receiving your championship that you had one actual final battle with AZ, realizing that he was actually a really strong trainer. And once he got his best friend back, he set off to do his own thing. I think that it's more than safe to say that AZ was probably the most intriguing aspect about Pokemon X and Y. By and far. The fact that he seemingly shows up out of nowhere, the fact that he's as tall as a goddamned mountain, and the fact that his exposure to the weapon allowed him to live longer than 3,000 years, allowing him to search for his best friend, is pure insanity. This is an insane character. Despite how people may have felt about the overall story of Pokemon X and Y, most people can agree that AZ was definitely a heartfelt centerpiece of the entire experience. Next to that, of course, another crazy important character that we cannot leave out is Lysander, the leader of Team Flare. Essentially, he felt that the world of Pokemon as it was ugly, and he really just wanted to hit the reset button to give humanity and Pokemon another shot at becoming something much more beautiful. Obviously, his plan was to use the ultimate weapon to carry out his plans. Back in the day, I thought that this was kind of a ridiculous thing, but looking back on it now, I feel as if that thought process is a little hypocritical when Generation 4 is probably my favorite generation, and our main antagonist there is Cyrus, who had a very similar plot in mind. Cyrus's goal was a little bit more direct, as in he wanted a more emotionless world so that people didn't have to deal with things like pain and hurt and stuff like that, but alternatively, they wouldn't be able to feel love and care and hope either. Obviously, nobody would want to live in a world like that. In the case of Lysander, it was more of a situation in which people in Pokemon, the way that they are basically abusing the world and each other, is harming it and making it uglier every day. And the best way to handle that is by just wiping out what's there presently and pressing just the big hard reset. It's just that simply the way that he wanted to handle that situation was absolutely out there. But now, as a more grown individual, I could definitely see more so of where his mindset was at. And to an extent, I understand. The world can be sick and gross and ugly sometimes, and it really sucks. It's hard not to want to just hit the big red button all the time. But then nobody would learn, nobody would grow. We would all just be gone. And the next group, whatever species would come after humanity, or Pokemon or whatever, would probably end up falling into very similar patterns. It's not really a solution. I digress. Thinking back on it and playing back through the game recently, Lysander has definitely grown on me as an antagonist. Still very ridiculous overall, but I definitely can see his viewpoint of things, and I like him a lot more than I used to. After that, of course, we had characters like Looker, who played a much heftier role in the post-game more than anything, but he was still a very fun character to have around, especially because this wasn't the first time he was introduced, and it wouldn't be the last either. Playing sidekick to a goofy detective is always a phenomenal time, so I loved the option to do the looker missions post-game. And then, of course, we have all of the gym leaders and stuff like that. Some stood out a little bit more than others, obviously, like Karina, like I mentioned earlier, Clement, primarily because him and his sister were kind of a unique duo, and their gym was in the center of Lumio City, so that was really fun. And then we had our champion, yeah, whatever. Not much going on with her. Overall, we have a very, let's be real, kind of whatever cast when it comes to Pokemon X and Y. There are aspects that are okay and even good, but for the most part, it's just kind of lacking in a lot more depth than there could be with a majority of the cast. Which is why, in this particular case, I think it's very easy for me to say that in this aspect, Pokemon Legends ZA absolutely did improve on that. Not to say that the characters are written perfectly or anything like that, but we did get a much more interesting cast this time around overall. Team MZ being the primary cast here was actually a lot of fun. Getting to know characters like Lita, like Naveen, like Urbane and Tawny, and getting to actually spend just a little bit more time with AZ was a phenomenal time. Now here's what's interesting, right? I still think that there is a lack of depth when it comes to the character writing in Pokemon games. For the most part, there are so many situations in which I was begging and pleading to explore more of these characters' stories. We got very surface level situations that kind of touched upon what kind of situations these characters are dealing with. Naveen feeling a little suffocated at home while wanting to explore his passion with being a designer, so finding a safe space at the hotel to be able to do that. Lita wanting to be more like her brother or just generally a better dancer like Tierno is very interesting. We touch upon these things, but we never go as in depth as we possibly could, and that's a little frustrating, but the fact that we had that little bit of a tease is more than I felt like we ever got with the original main cast in Pokemon X and Y. And I do think it's really incredible that we had the opportunity to get some characters back like AZ, like Lysander, and I do want to acknowledge that more, but I think I'm going to save that for the next section for a very specific reason. Just know though that I am very pleased with their presence in this game as well, much more than I was in their originals. But outside of the main cast, we have a very just generally fun cast to mess around with when it comes to Lumio City in general. The ranked trainers that are participating in the ZA Royale is one of the most colorful casts we have easily ever had in the entirety of the franchise. What I said a moment ago about Team MZ absolutely applies to a character like Corbeau, the leader of the Rust Syndicate. The mob boss with a heart of gold that's willing to play the villain is a crazy character for Pokemon to come up with. My absolute short king, one of the best characters we've gotten in the entirety of the franchise by and far. I adore this man. We have characters with a crazy dynamic like Jacinthe and Laban that are completely unforgettable because it's so strange and unique to this franchise. The big, buff, protective meathead brother Ivor and his little sister Gwyn. And at first, I felt like Kanari was pretty much a copy and paste of Iono, but in all honesty, Kanari has a lot more going on personality-wise than Iono ever did. Let's be super for real. Don't get me wrong, I still love both of them, but I think what I said still definitely applies. Now, of course, there are some downfalls when it comes to characters like Emma that had a lot of potential and didn't show up and do nearly as much as she possibly could have. Obviously, Jet and Vinny running Quasartico Inc. could have been a much more interesting plot point if utilized a little bit heavier. But overall, again, they still had a lot of potential, and compared to the cast that we had in X and Y, it's kind of a no-brainer that everybody that we have here is a little bit more interesting and tight-knit, and I really love that about this cast. So, without dragging it out too much, yes, I do fully believe that the cast that we have here is a much bigger improvement than what we had in Pokemon X and Y. Moving on here, the next category that we have listed is the story. In traditional Pokemon sense in Pokemon X and Y, you are a trainer working to be the region's strongest trainer. You are working toward a championship. Obviously though, there are major obstacles in your way, one of the primary ones being Team Flare, an evil group of extremists who are working towards global genocide. But to do so, they are terrorizing towns and cities and corporations just because. It's kind of crazy, I'll be honest. So, as per usual in typical Pokemon fashion, it comes down to you and your team, primarily you, Serena, and your Pokemon team, to stop Lysander from completely resetting the world of Pokemon as we know it. I never thought that Pokemon X and Y's story was one of the strongest in the series by any means, and playing through it again recently, I think that feeling still very much stands today. I wasn't really all that attached to the general plot or the characters that much back in the day. I just kind of remember playing through it and having a generally good time because the vibes in Kalos were awesome. But that's kind of all it had. I didn't play through X and Y very many times back in the day. But generally speaking, I think it's safe to say that I and a lot of others still had a very good time with the game, generally speaking, during our first or second playthroughs back in the day. Transitioning into Pokemon Legends ZA, I think it is more than safe to say that we've had a massive improvement when it comes to the story, for a multitude of reasons. The reason I wanted to save the discussion about Lysander and AZ for this topic was because they are essentially centerpieces of the story that's unfolding in Legends ZA. Because the weapon essentially almost destroyed itself completely after its use in Pokemon X and Y, it essentially lay dormant for a long while. But because it was damaged, it would inevitably start a leak that would lead to the overuse of Mega Evolution within Lumio City because it was the surrounding area, primarily in kind of random Pokemon that were living around there, essentially causing the situation of rogue Mega Evolution. Essentially, while trying to find a way to keep this under wraps and keep the city safe, Quasartico Inc. and AZ worked together to create the ZA Royale, a method in hunting down the strongest trainers available in the city to help deal with the current situation. Obviously, they got very lucky in stumbling across a trainer like Urbane and Tawny, but even more so, you. So, in turn, you have two missions ahead of you. Not only are you participating in the ZA Royale to become the strongest trainer in Lumiose, but you are also working to protect it in the background secretly by taking care of the rogue Mega Evolution problem. If it wasn't clear already, I love the story of Pokemon Legends ZA. It brings so much more depth to the original than I thought possible. It takes a lot of the general ideas and concepts that were already present and kind of expands upon them in Legends ZA. They actually do take advantage of that story in a couple of ways, and that's what I love more than anything else. And that very much applies to both Lysander and AZ. When it comes to AZ, after the events of Pokemon X and Y, he was actually working to build a hotel that would house people and Pokemon alike, a comfortable place for people to just be. This is one of his ways of trying to atone for the atrocities he's committed by building the weapon and allowing it to be fired. He wanted to make up for allowing the weapon to create a potentially dangerous world by giving people a safe space. Hence why characters like Lita and Naveen found such a safe haven there, because he worked very hard to make that a safe space for them. Now, on the other side of the same coin, we have Lysander, who actually survived the events of Pokemon X and Y because he was rescued by Zygarde. While he did lose a lot of his memories, the ones that he did get back made him really rethink about how he went about things. He's very much regretful of his actions, which is why in the background of the primary story, he is actually doing a lot of work to help out the player character. And while he's not a villain anymore, he's still very angry, or at the very least definitely upset or disappointed with AZ because he feels that AZ is not doing everything that he can to atone for his actions. In a way, he sees a little bit of AZ in himself and himself in AZ in that front, in which these are both grown men who made very bad mistakes in the past and wants to atone for it, and they're both going about it in very different ways. There's a lot of heavy themes of regret and repercussion that kind of builds up throughout the story here, and I absolutely adore that aspect. One of the major takeaways that I've gotten from this story is that there are actions for your consequences. Yeah, you're trying to atone for what you did with the weapon, but the weapon in of itself still needs to be dealt with because it's becoming a danger to others. Maybe you do want to assist the Pokemon living within Lumio City by building safe spaces for them, but that makes the livelihoods of the people that are already living there much harder. They play into that theme pretty well, and I respect that a lot. Now again, to reiterate, I don't think that the story of Legends ZA is perfect by any means. There are still characters and storylines that I would have loved to see fleshed out more, but I think it's safe to say that what they do have here is very solid, and I do love what they did with it. Not to mention that we had one of the sickest endings to a Pokemon game that we have ever seen. You cannot tell me otherwise. Everybody in the city coming together to battle all those rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon to end it off with Zygarde cutting down Angie, that is the sickest shit I think I have ever witnessed. I digress though. The long and short of it is, I think it is very easy to say that they did definitely take what was there with X and Y and expanded upon it in a lot of positive ways. Now, the last category that I have written down here is the gameplay and gimmicks. With Pokemon X and Y back in 2013, we were introduced to our first ever fully 3D Pokemon game. Of course though, that in of itself did not really have an effect on the Pokemon titles that we know and love. They were still our traditional turn-based RPGs that we've been playing for the past 5 generations up to that point beforehand. But it's not like they didn't go out of their way to make some really interesting and unique additions to the game. The biggest and most unique change that they made that changed the game pretty much forever was our introduction to Mega Evolution. Essentially, in any battle, your Pokemon gets the equivalent of a Super Saiyan transformation to deal more damage or gain more buffs. Of course though, this mechanic didn't apply to every single Pokemon, it was a very dedicated handful, which meant that older Pokemon that we had known for a good while up to that point were getting a brand new power-up. This completely changed the game in the competitive aspect and made it very exciting for a lot of people to reutilize older Pokemon that they hadn't thought about in a while. But just generally speaking, it made the traditional turn-based battles just a little bit more interesting, because up to that point, Pokemon had done it the same way, played it safe for 5 straight generations. They wanted to change it up a little bit, and I can't really blame them. I think it was a good addition. Even though I did mention it earlier, I think it's important to mention here since it is a gameplay mechanic, that being the skating. This basically worked as our run button, allowing us to just kind of zip across the region on skates and even utilize like grinding rails and stuff like that, like your Sonic the goddamned Hedgehog. One of the sickest things they could have done. This was also one of the strongest introductions that we had to Pokemon interactivity with Pokemon Amie. Basically, a very good way to connect with your Pokemon, build up friendship, and make it so that they could survive hits, or you could power them up, generally speaking. It was just a nice and fun mechanic. Overall, when it comes to Pokemon in a general sense, the gameplay aspect is rarely ever the problem in of itself. There are aspects that definitely can be a little more dry and stale, but for the most part, people are still playing it because it's Pokemon, they know and love it, it's easy to get into, and it's just a good time. Now, when you compare it to Legends ZA, I actually have a problem giving full credit to Legends ZA, and I'll explain why. Like we've mentioned a million times now, Pokemon Legends as a series is going to continue to be a sister series co-releasing alongside the generational titles. The Legends games have a little bit more freedom in what they're allowed to do. They're allowed to play around more with mechanics that wouldn't usually be touched in the generational titles. Usually, we would never ever mess with the turn-based combat in any of these games. Pokemon Legends having that freedom allows them to completely circumvent that. And because of that, we were introduced to our first ever mainline Pokemon title with real-time battles. Now, obviously, whether or not this is a good or bad change is completely dependent on the person. If you have seen pretty much any of my content regarding Pokemon Legends ZA, you would know that I personally am a big fan of the real-time battle aspect here. I think that it's a lot more engaging, I think that it keeps you on your toes more, and when it comes to boss battles, it's a lot more scary and a lot more interesting. Now, I can comfortably say all this because I would be happy with this mechanic going forward, specifically for the Legends titles. I wouldn't want this to replace the turn-based battle aspect that we have in the generational titles. I want this to continue because I feel like it helps the Legends titles create its own identity. Real-time battles being a mechanic within these games really helps embody the idea that these games have a lot more freedom to do as they please. And I would just love to see this mechanic be improved and utilized in prehistoric or futuristic versions of other regions that I would like to revisit. So I guess to clarify, I think it's not necessarily that it's that much better, it's just that it's so different that I like it so much. And because of this mechanical change to the baseline battles, they had to also make a change in how you utilize Mega Evolution. This time around, instead of an immediate power buff to your Pokemon the moment you get into battle, you actually have to build up to it a little bit. They made it so that you actually have to build up a meter before you can utilize Mega Evolution. And on top of that, there is a meter, which means that it can run out. So during like a boss battle or something like that, you need to actually make sure that you're strategizing your moves properly so that you can beat the enemy before your power-up runs out. And I think that the way Mega Evolution is ingrained with this battle system is much more interesting and way more well-refined. When it was first introduced, I remember a lot of people saying that it was just straight up busted as a mechanic. It was completely broken. Obviously, because of all of the balance patches and a lot of the new mechanics that we have available to us now, it's not as bad, but it's still pretty damn strong. Hell, in this situation, it is still very strong, but so are your opponents, so you still need to be very careful in how you utilize it. So I think that it's very well placed here, and for the most part, as a gimmick, it's been improved. Now, like I stated earlier, it's a little hard to give the gameplay aspects full points for this. While I do like some of the general changes that were made, it's still really unfortunate that we're missing a lot of stuff too. This would have been an absolute prime time to bring back some form of Pokemon Me equivalent and give us a full circle situation. Unfortunately, the Pokemon interactivity here is kind of the weakest it's been in years. And like I mentioned earlier, not having rollerblading, which was a very critical aesthetic to Kalos back in the day, is a damn shame. It just seems like a lot of wasted potential in that aspect. So, I don't know. Like I said, I kind of give this one a little bit of a half point because there are things that I liked and there were things that were drastically upsetting. But that just about wraps up my list here. So, I guess that leads us to our final question. Is Pokemon Legends ZA a good sequel? In my personal case, if this wasn't obvious, yeah, I do think so. There's a lot more that I liked than disliked, and I think that there was a lot of improvements here that kind of built upon what I did like about X and Y to begin with. I think that Pokemon Legends ZA gives me a lot to look forward to with Legends as a sister series to the mainline generational titles. I'm really excited to be able to look forward to the future of Kanto or Johto or Hoenn. Potentially a prehistoric Unova or a Alola is now on the table. But jumping back on track, I do think that there were improvements, generally speaking, to what Pokemon X and Y had to offer. And that is pretty much all that matters to me. X and Y had its aspects to it, and Pokemon Legends ZA improved upon a lot of those aspects. And that really did it for me. I like Legends ZA. And I think it's pretty easy for me personally to say that I liked it a little bit more than X and Y as a game, but I don't know, maybe you disagree, and that's totally fine for us to have differing opinions, but I'm not gonna sit here and act like everybody and their mamas didn't have a problem with X and Y the entire time until we started to see, I'm not getting into this. Regardless, I think the Legends ZA was a phenomenal time, and you don't have to agree with me, because, hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me. So that just about does it for this one. This was definitely one that was meant to come out a little after my review for Pokemon Legends ZA. It just kind of sat in the background here, and while we're in this downtime, I kind of figured, hey, you know what, may as well utilize this one. But obviously, you know, it's a little dated, I know, but I figured we'd get this conversation out now before our next inevitable game with Winds and Waves and whatever Legends title happens to come after that. So yeah, I think that overall Legends ZA is a very solid title. I think it is definitely missing a lot in terms of mechanics and aspects that it could have really utilized to help improve itself, but overall I think it's solid. I do think that it improved on a lot from X and Y, and I think it was a fun time, so hopefully you guys feel the same. Also, shameless plug, I am going to be a lot more active on my second channel during this downtime for Pokemon. I'm going to be talking about, you know, since Gaming Christmas essentially ended with all the major showcases with State of Play, Xbox Showcase, Summer Games Fest, and a Nintendo Direct. We got a lot of cool information on a lot of games that I really want to talk about with Kingdom Hearts, Xenoblade Genesis, Ocarina of Time. Did I already say Kingdom Hearts? I'm sure I did. That's probably the first thing I said because I love Kingdom Hearts. But if you guys are interested in, you know, all the streams that I'm going to be doing over there, because I'm going to be playing through a lot of different games that I've never played before. We're going to be having some, you know, little fun little streams here and there and stuff like that. Make sure to check out Soul Side Quest. It's going to be in the link in the description below. We're going to be stupid active over there. But of course, you know, we're still going to be streaming weekly for our Hardcore Nuzlocke over here, and then we are also going to be doing a lot more in terms of like talking about fan games, talking about you know, other modern Pokemon stuff that I'd like to see. We're gonna play around a little bit. We'll see what we can get out of this this quiet year of Pokemon, but we'll play that by ear. Now, I've yammered on enough. I'm passing the mic over to you guys, and I want you guys to tell me everything that you're thinking in the comment section below. Do you agree that Pokemon Legends ZA is a pretty good sequel? It does a lot right from what its predecessor introduced, and it brought a lot to the table for you? Or are you on the opposing side? It is not a good sequel, it's not even a good game. Legends ZA doesn't deserve any form of credit in that regard. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I'm always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, it does appear to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and do exactly so. I'd like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor, taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!